Welcome, everybody. My name is Jason. It's very abrupt. I'm like one of the pastors here. Good to see you. We're in week 2 of a series we're calling Renovate. Last week, Pastor Adam talked with us about our expectations in relationships, how we get disappointed and we have expectations of people, and we sometimes forget to take a look in the mirror and do the work inside first before we go throwing stones at other people. If you missed that last week, I always encourage you to go back either on our app or website or on YouTube. You can subscribe to C3 Tri-Cities and catch up on those, watch them throughout the week, and always encourage you to do that. Today, we're week 2, and talk about repurposing pain. And I thought about, and if you're watching at home, maybe you look around your house like I did this week and just come up with some of the items that I take for granted around my house that are actually, when I look at them, are repurposed items. Let's see if I can pull them out. Some of it's just plain old clutter, but we've lived in our house a long time. So this started out as a solo cup. Judging by the audience here, I'm guessing you all know what a solo cup is. I won't say any more about that. Anyways, one of my kids took thread and they cut strips in the solo cup and they threaded it around, and this is now a pencil holder in our house. It's very glamorous, but it has sentimental value, but it's a repurposed item. This wasn't, you don't go and buy one of these at the store like this. Along that same vein, my son, a couple years ago, took a piece we have firewood out back from old fence board and all this kind of stuff. He took and wrote on it, "I love my dad." And then on the back, he's really, I think I talked about his military exploits a couple weeks ago. He has a stormtrooper here. He says he's a real trooper. So, this was a piece of scrap out in my yard, and now I will never, ever, ever part with it. And on the bad days, I go, "Look, see how cute you used to be." I had to think about this one, but I actually bought these sandals from REI a couple weeks ago. They're made out of recycled materials. So thanks for recycling, because now I have a pair of flip-flops I can wear to the pool. Even C3 has gotten in on the action, a piece of slate. Somebody decided they were just going to cut up a bunch of squares and put the C3 logo on them, and so now I have a coffee cup holder at my house with the logo on it. I have some other things in here too, but I'll save that for next service and show them. If you want to come up afterwards, I guess you can peek in at all the mysteries there, but I don't want the commercial to be better than the product. We know what it is to repurpose things, and it's even kind of an initiative in our culture to reduce, reuse, and recycle, to find ways of keeping the waste down, of looking for ways to repurpose items around our house. And some of you are real DIY experts. You can see the vision of a pile of scrap, and you can turn it into something beautiful or something functional or something. There's a whole generation of people, as I do a lot of funerals, people from the Great Depression era who were very, very creative because they didn't have Amazon. They didn't have such a disposable mindset, and so they were always ingenious in being able to look at something and going, "Oh, well, I think I can take that and use that for this." And I feel like some of that gets lost. I just have never had that wiring. I'm not creative that way. Some of you are brilliant with that. I go to the craft shows and see all that stuff at Art in the Park a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, I would have never thought of that. But some of you have that mentality. But generally speaking, whether you have that talent or not, you understand the value of repurposing things. And whether it lives in a box or not, some of the things that we talk about repurposing in our life make sense, and other things it's a little harder sell. And what we want to talk about today in this Renovate series is repurposing pain. I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way. We're going to talk about why that's a particular problem in our culture, but I'm a kid of the 80s, and if you don't know 80s music at all, work with me here for a minute, but there was a very famous song, REM, sang out back when music videos were a thing. And they're singing, "Everybody cries, everybody hurts sometimes." Yeah, okay. Go pull out Automatic for the People, you people of a certain age, and play it for your youth, and our generation will be spared. It's a good song. Everybody hurts sometimes. We recognize that pain is common to the human experience. We all hurt at some point. The problem and the question that usually comes up for people in the midst of pain is, what's the point? What is the point of pain? And some people take that all the way to the top of the food chain, and they blame God for, why are you doing this to me? Why am I going through all of this? What is the point? And as a Christian community, sometimes we're good with that, and other times we are terrible at responding to that because we come at it with all the Bible verses and all the slogans and all the things. If you've ever been on the receiving end of those, you develop an extreme allergy to those responses because they do not help. You've told me this over and over again, the things that, from well-meaning people that try, they're trying to comfort you, they're trying to whatever, but it just comes out all wrong because we don't like pain. I've never met anybody that says, oh, I just love it. Now, there are some people who are adrenaline junkies, they're gluttons for punishment, and they'll go out and they'll hurt themselves, and but there's always more to that as you get behind a person's story of why that is, and we'll talk about a little bit of that too. But for the most part, we just don't like it very much. But if it doesn't get transformed in some way, as Father Richard Rohr says it so beautifully, pain that's not transformed gets transmitted. If you don't deal directly with the pain in your own life, it's gonna rub off on somebody else, usually in negative ways. We end up hurting people that we care about. We end up hurting people we don't even know and making their experience worse. And as people who are called by God to live differently, we have to look very seriously about the pain that every one of us experience in whatever form or fashion it comes, and ask God to transform it so that it doesn't get transmitted. Do you see why this is so important? Because when we don't, it just makes a mess of things, and it's avoidable. That's the thing. Sometimes I feel like people think, oh, God's really just after me, and it's like, no, he's trying to save us from a ton of heartache for ourselves and the impact that can make out this way and in future generations. Save yourself a lot of trouble, and I think the younger you are, the better to latch on to this message, because people who are older and wiser and more experienced in life than I have been tell me this over and over again. Oh, I wish I would have figured this out earlier in life so that it doesn't create so much heartache. Well, where does this come from? Let's look at the book of Romans, chapter 8, 28, a verse that many of you hear. I listen to Christian radio, and I hear this verse laced in and throughout. It gets a little misquoted sometimes, and so I want to go slow through this and really understand what we're talking about when we talk about repurposing pain. Here's what Paul tells the church in Rome. We know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Now, I'm going to read it again slow, because some of you right away have gone in and heard that God's going to work everything out like a 30-minute sitcom. And we're just all going to hug it out at the end. No, that's not what he said. We know that in all things, God works for the good of those. So he's working for us. He's not necessarily cleaning up the circumstances all the time. He's not eliminating pain from our life all the time. He's not saying, oh, it's just going to be a bed of roses from here on out. In all things, pain included, God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. This is God's intention for you, is to do a work in you to transform you in the midst of your situation. Good times, bad times, it doesn't matter. And so we cannot just sidebar a whole portion of our life that we wish weren't there, but is where pain is considered. We have to invite that part of our life into the conversation and say, okay, God, I'm not just asking you to work in these situations that make me feel comfortable and make my life easier. I'm asking you to do a work in me in the uncomfortable situations in my life, in the pains that I face in my body, in my spirit, in my mind, in my emotions, all of these things. It's, God, I'm giving it all to you, okay? This is what God is working out through us. So there's possibility there. And that's good news for us, that there is possibility for us in the midst of the painful experiences in our life, that God can repurpose our pain for good. And so with that as the main idea, I want to just sum it up today as best I can in our big idea for today, and an encouragement for you as you consider your life and the experiences that you're going through right now is to not let your pain go to waste. Don't let your pain go to waste. There's opportunity there, and you don't have to like it, but you dare not bury your head in the sand and just sort of wish it away and act like it isn't there or try and spiritualize everything and then be mad at God when he doesn't do it the way you want. Okay? So let's dig in because I think the why question is very important. I'm not trying to dismiss that. When people go through hard times, they want to know why. There is a search for meaning, and we're not the first people on the planet to do that. People have been asking this for a very long time, and there's some wisdom there that I think we can pull from, even if you're not seeing it around you. So let's dig in there because we want to be able to answer the why question, but we also need to talk about what now. If pain is inevitable, what am I supposed to do with what I'm going through or what I may go through in the future? So we want to look at those two things, the why and the what now. So let's do that as we move forward. Let's answer the why question just as simply as I can. And you may not like this answer, but take it up with the Bible because that's where I get my answers from. Okay, I'm just telling you what I read. Here's what the Bible teaches us about why there's pain. Pain is part of the present human condition. It is the consequence of sin. It is the consequence of sin. Every time you get a headache, the intention is for you to be reminded, I live in a sinful, fallen world. Every time you feel heartache at the loss of somebody dear, you're supposed to be reminded, oh, I live in a sinful, fallen world. This is the present human condition that we all find ourselves in. Where do I get that from? Genesis chapter 3, the story of creation and the first human beings on the planet, Adam and Eve. We've talked about this story so many times over the years. But you remember how this starts. Pain wasn't a part of the equation at the very beginning, was it? There was perfection in the Garden of Eden. And the serpent, Satan, tempted Adam and Eve, and they chose sin. They chose it. They chose rebellion, essentially. And some of us might look at that and go, oh, those stupid humans. I would have never done that. I totally bet you would. So we've inherited this now as a curse because God did not take sin lightly. God never takes sin lightly. He punishes it. He cast Adam and Eve out of the garden, and as a part of the curse, he said, Adam, you're going to have to work your tail off to make things grow. And the farmer said, not many farmers, they're out working today, that's why. It's harvest time, some of it. And guess what, women? Pain in childbirth. Now, I've obviously never had a child that way. I've always kidded over the years that if it were up to men to have children, we would have a severe underpopulation problem, not overpopulation. The comedian Carol Burnett used to say that having a child was tantamount to pulling your lower lip over your head, which does not sound fun at all. And no wonder that all of the biblical writers, when they are talking about extreme pain, and this is the days before epidurals and spinal blocks and all this, talk about the pain of childbirth. That is the most extreme form of pain they could think of as something that just makes you go, oh man, I wish there was another way. That is pain. But this is where it comes from. It's a consequence of our sin. And again, lest we think we throw our hands up, Isaiah 53:6 is a very stark reminder. When the prophet says to his people and to us, we all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us to our own way. We all have that propensity to wander, to want to do it our way, to think we have a better idea all the time. Oh, God really doesn't care, or I think I can. And there's a consequence that comes with that. Sometimes we decide our way into a whole heap of pain. Sometimes it just comes our way, but either way, when you ask why, the answer is, I live in a sinful, fallen world. This is my present condition on this planet at this time. And it is a consequence of sin that we live with. That is not, however, the final story. So Paul, again, in Romans chapter 8, gives us this. We know that the whole creation is groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. This is what we are living with. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even after you accept Jesus, we still experience pain. And that's very disappointing to people who think that saying yes and getting baptized and all that takes care of it all. Pain is still part of the process right now. We groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. That's what happens on the other side of this life. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. And so we have to come to grips with the reality of what we're faced with. Okay, again, not a huge, I don't think my popularity points are going to go up today when I explain to you that why is basically our fault. Okay, we're our own worst enemy. It's the consequence of sin. But now the what now? Now the what now? Let's look at that, because the first thing I want us to do is really three things that I think of that don't take care of it all, but it gives us a way to engage this part of our life. The first thing that I would invite you to do is to pay attention to your pain. Pay attention to it. We Americans have a terrible, terrible pain problem. Do you know how much money we spend annually on pain management? The closest figures I could get were from 2010, when gas was under $3 a gallon, so you'll have to do the math there a little bit. At that point, 2010, we were spending $635 billion a year as a nation on pain management. Closer to $1 trillion now, annually on pain management. And that's just the pain that people present with, that people identify. How much pain are people going through that they never speak up, they never say anything, they keep it to themselves. Oh, I don't want to go to the doctor, or I don't want, and they live with pain, all kinds of pain. You can't put a dollar figure on that. But our culture is so pain averse. You know this. I remember there was some, I think it was called Metaprin, or I thought it was Tylenol or whatever, but they bootlegged the old Carly Simon song, I haven't got time for the pain. I haven't got room for the pain anymore. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to take these pills and bye-bye pain, because we don't like it. We don't like the joint aches and the muscle aches and the headaches and the everything aches and the what. We want to get rid of it. We go to the counselor because we don't like the hole in our heart. We go to the psychiatrist because we don't like the mess that our heads have become. We go to the bar because we want to numb out the pain. We go do all kinds of crazy things because we don't like pain. We just don't like it. And in the midst of that, even though it's so common to all of us, we tell ourselves and each other the worst possible things. I think about all the people who are going through cancer, and the best we can come up with is F cancer. And I'm like, no. What? That's really the best we can do? What if we could just say, oh my gosh, cancer. What a huge, heavy burden. And some of you are going through it right now. And you're the ones who tell me that all this isn't really helpful at the end of the day because it doesn't address fear. It doesn't address loneliness. It doesn't address uncertainty. It doesn't address those deeper pains that we feel. See, our human bodies, we fail and get frail and all these kinds of things. But I tell you what, during COVID, I didn't meet anybody that said that isolation wasn't worse than the physical symptoms they were experiencing. There's always something deeper there in us that needs to pay attention to the pain and not try and disregard it or shout it down or get, that we just have to reach a point of acceptance. And that is very difficult for us to do. Now, again, for me to sit up here and talk about pain, the worst pain I've ever come up with, I was thinking when I was a kid, my sister, like closed fist, socked me upside the head one time and rung my bell pretty good. That's about it. I've never been shot. I've never had a limb amputated. People have all kinds of really awful, awful pain stories. I can't even come close. So I read from people who can relate to extreme pain. Viktor Frankl is one of my favorites. He was a concentration camp survivor, famous psychiatrist and sociologist who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And here's how he addresses pain. Now, you think about surviving a concentration camp. Adam has talked about that in his family history too. But here's what he says about pain. He says, pain is only bearable if we know it will end, not if we deny that it exists. You can't just close your eyes and just, it'll go away. That's denial. That's denial. It won't help you and it won't help anybody else. What seems to help doesn't sound fun, but it's sitting with the reality of your state, of acknowledging and accepting the fact that you're going through a hard time, that there are problems in your life that either physically are causing you pain or maybe have affected your emotions and your spiritual life. There's even such a thing called spiritual pain that when I go in a clinical setting, I assess for. Is the person dealing with a sense of hopelessness? That's real pain. Are people living with a sense of unforgiveness for themselves or for somebody else? That's real pain. A sense of meaning and purpose in their life. Have they run out of good reasons to stick around? That's pain. Do you see how deep this stuff runs? It's not just, oh, my arm hurts. It's like sometimes we're talking about futures on the line. And the greater purpose, which is to have a sense of peace at the end and in our present time. So again, we're terrible at it in certain ways. In other ways, we're really great at it. And this is where I lean into the biblical examples, a very Jewish mindset of put it all out on the table for God. Don't just compartmentalize your life and say, okay, God, you get this part. You read in the book of Psalms, they're not all happy Psalms. David was ripped up a lot. And he was the person in the highest position of power. And he's writing about these things that tear him up. The prophets are pouring it. There's even a book called Lamentations. It's not a real, cup of coffee kind of thing in the morning. It's rough, but it's putting it out there. A lot of music, even contemporary music, it is emotional. And it's not all, but there's a silver lining at the end. It just leaves you with that state of, wow. Films are that way. In our house, we have action-driven movies where a lot of things blow up, and we have character-driven movies that are usually subtitled and people are crying a lot. And I don't mind these movies because it reminds me that pain is a part of our reality, and it takes a long time to work out sometimes, if it ever does. And there's comfort in that somehow, some way, because we can relate to that not everything cleans itself up, and you can't just shoot somebody and solve all your problems. You have to live with uncomfortable relationships. You have to live with problems. You have to live with chronic pain, with injury, with all of these kinds of things. And you have to find a way through that. And art can really help tap into that. Even visual arts, paintings, they evoke something in us. The Bible is great at that too. I would invite you, go slow, but read through the book of Job. Chew on it for a little bit. Don't just kind of whip through it in your 365 in a year kind of thing and say, oh, okay, glad I got that over with, on to something happier. Just sit with that for a little bit. It's not as big a downer as you think, honestly. It puts us in touch with something that is at the core of who we are, that God wants to be in as well. So here's how I think about it, very simply. You go into a doctor's office, get your checkup, you see a pain scale, looks like this. Okay, now we usually think about that in terms of the presenting issue that you're in for. Oh, I got the flu, or something doesn't feel right, my guts hurt or whatever. But I want you to think about some of these other kinds of pain that might be happening in your life. What's your relational pain scale right now? What's your spiritual pain scale right now? What's your emotional pain scale right now? Your psychological pain scale right now? Your forgiveness pain scale right now? Do you see where I'm going with this? Every time I see this, I recognize that the symptom isn't usually the problem, but it points to something deeper, and that's worth paying attention to. Don't run away from that. Don't pretend like it doesn't exist. Don't be afraid of it. You don't have to be, because God has invited himself into those places too. And we're going to look at why that matters so much as we move forward, because he's not asking us to just jump into the deep end with no way out, with no lifesaver, with no plan of rescue. He's promised to be there with us. But here's what you got to do. And this is where the rubber starts meeting the road, is once you begin to pay attention to your pain, then the second thing you got to do is hand over your hurt. You got to hand it over. Jeremiah chapter 18 gives us great imagery. Jeremiah was a prophet back in Old Testament times. And God spoke to him and said, I want you to go down to the potter's house, and I want you to watch what the potter's doing. Now, you can get a pottery wheel still even these days, so hopefully that's not such a foreign concept. People have been making pottery for a very long time. But what God tells Jeremiah in this verse is this. As Jeremiah looked, he says, the pot that the potter was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands, so the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. And he goes on. Then the Lord said to me, can I not do with you, Israel, as the potter does? Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. Well, there's an understanding there that we're allowing God to shape us, to mold us, transform us. And some of you say, I'm too far gone. I'm not moldable. I'm a curmudgeon. I'm set in my ways. I got too much baggage from the past. And I'd go with you if there wasn't such a thing called grog. You ever heard of grog? I'm not a potter. I'm not an artist in that way. But apparently, potters, when a piece doesn't turn out quite right, and they will discard it, and it's hardened and all that stuff, and they're having trouble working with the current piece of pottery on the wheel, will take some of that hardened, discarded stuff, and they'll smash it up. And that dust is added to the pottery that they're working on, and it actually strengthens it. Isn't that funny? As they're working with it, that grog actually makes the pot that they're working on better, more malleable in the potter's hand. And I think this is what God is trying to show Jeremiah, but he's trying to show us as well. Author I've read before, some of you have read, her name is Lisa Turkhurst, was talking about this. She has a relative, I think, who was into pottery. And she saw the spiritual analogy there of using this grog in one of two ways. And she says it this way. She says, a broken potsherd, that's a little broken piece of clay, can lie on the ground and mean nothing more than a constant reminder of brokenness. That's what we like to do with pain sometimes. We just sit there and go, like we're helpless, hopeless. But she says it can also be used to continue to scrape us and hurt us even more when kept in our hands. That's what some of us like to do with our pain. We wouldn't know what to do if we didn't let go of it. So we hold on to it, and it just hurts us even more. But then she says this, or when placed in our master's hands, the master potter can be entrusted to take that potsherd, shatter it just right, and then use it in the remolding of us to make us stronger and even more beautiful. What if your scars were the best part of your story? What if the broken pieces were exactly where you became stronger, more beautiful? Instead of denying those things or think, I'm such a mess because of those. See how shame can pile in as if there's nothing else can be done. But God says, no, I want to use those things too to create in you a beautiful you, a new you with a story that matches and can make a big difference in the lives of others. God is the one who has done the work. This is not just about us sort of getting in there and doing some mental exercises. It's because of what we read in Isaiah 53, 3 through 5. Prophet Isaiah, writing hundreds of years before Jesus even showed up, but he was prophesying about what Jesus came to do. He says, people looked down on him. They didn't accept him. He knew all about pain and suffering. He chose to do this, to come to us. He was like someone people turn their faces away from. We looked down on him. We didn't have any respect for him. He suffered the things we should have suffered. He took on himself the pain that should have been ours. But we thought God was punishing him. We thought God was wounding him and making him suffer. But the servant was pierced because we had sinned. He was crushed because we had done what was evil. He was punished to make us whole again. By his wounds have healed us. Healing wounds. That seems like an oxymoron. But because of the fact that pain is a part of the curse, Jesus said, I cannot live with that. I would rather die. than to see you broken and to live with that as your legacy. Jesus has come to make you whole. Well, how does that even work? It's by handing over your hurts and quit pretending that you can do a better job of it on your own. We've proven for millennia that we cannot. Learn now and hand it over. It's as simple as a prayer. God, I give you control of even the broken parts of my life because only you can take it and make me whole. I repent of my pride, my shame, my ignorance, whatever. God, you deserve all of this because you can take the broken pieces and make something beautiful out of my life. And I give that to you. That's what it looks like. That's what it means to hand over your hurt and to let the potter, the master potter, do what he and only he can do so beautifully in your life. And then you share your story. That's the third thing I would, you don't keep that kind of transformation to yourself. On these home makeover shows, they don't do all the work and then go on to the next show. They always have the reveal. They want to talk about what happened and all the work that they had to do. And all. You want to be able to share your story as well. Why? Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 7. He says, our hope for you is firm because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so also you share in our comfort. The best way to build rapport with people in pain is to, first of all, listen to them. Listen to them. And try as best you can to relate, not to one-up them with, oh, you think that's bad. No, don't do that. Don't try and match them tit for tat, but to listen and say, oh, I've experienced something like that too. And I've had pain in my past. And here's how God was with me. Here's how God was transforming. And maybe it's your current state. Maybe what it's doing right now, it's not like all the pieces have been figured out. But it's like, I'm going through a situation right now where I've wondered the same thing. And here's where I feel God is helping me with this. Or here's what I've discovered as I walk through this really hard time. So many of you have done that for me in my life this last year as I've walked through a very uncertain time as a pastor, as a husband, as a parent. And you've just talked to me about your experience and how God has been with you and continues to be with you. And that gives me strength. That gives me the courage to be vulnerable with people. People say, oh, it's so brave that you can talk about mental health. And I'm like, it's like a person with hemorrhoids getting off a horse, Some things just make sense. Why would I not talk about the broken pieces of my life? Because I can look back and see how God has been with me. And I've gained that strength from hearing how God has been with you. Do you see the benefit that is for us to be together, whether you're watching online or whatever, to be able to share your story? That's why we do baptisms publicly. It's never to be a private experience for us because we want to be able to testify, not just in words are great, but the symbol of what baptism represents, this new life of coming down into the water and being raised to new spiritual life, new possibility, new opportunity because of what God has done and what God wants to do in our lives. It's not a sign of completion of anything other than figuring out that I can't do it on my own. That's the new life that we come into, and we want to do that together. I thought about it. I couldn't think anything other than this. Satan tries to use pain because he gets a shot at it too. He wants to use pain and does to distract and discourage and ultimately to destroy you. That's his plan for your pain because he gets a shot at it too. And some of you know that full well because you've been down that path. But God wants to use your pain to rebuild you, to give you a new story, and to bless others. That's what he wants for you. My challenge for you today is, what are you choosing? Who are you allowing in to your pain? Because if you're shutting God out, there's only one other person who wants it, and he'll do it to destroy you. So we have to make an exchange. I wanted to offer another challenge too. We've had a tab on our website for several years called Share Your Story, and apparently we're not doing a very good job of that. And as I look out at you folks, I know some of your stories very well. I'm not going to tell all your stories. It's your story. So I want you to do something for me this week. I want you to jump on our C3 website and go to where it says Share Your Story. And I want you to it doesn't have to be paragraphs, 100 words. Make yourself do it. Napkin speech. 100 words about your before meeting Christ, process of how God has changed your life or is changing your life. Doesn't have to be all wrapped up and tidy. How God is working in your situation and how you have experienced the change in your life as a result of it. Would you do that for me? It's powerful. And if you give us permission to share that, then we would love to do that. Okay? Because your stories have power. It's not just the people up here who have a story. Everybody has a story. And you want one that's worth retelling. It doesn't have to be spectacular. It doesn't have to be all the message. You don't have to go into great detail or give people's privacy up or whatever. Just talk about what was happening before, what God's doing now, and is continuing to do in your life. And trust God with what that could look like. I think about one of these. Do you know what this is? Somebody thought it was a chip clip or paper thing. No, there was an old gentleman here years ago named Victor Rogers who used to make these and sell them at craft shows. They're a toothpaste tube squeezer. And you put it in the end of the toothpaste tube, and you can either squeeze it and push the toothpaste up to the top, or you can put it in the end and roll it. It's a marriage saver. He saved marriages with these things. It's just scrap wood out in the back, but he saw an opportunity there. You know, at his funeral, I remember somebody bringing one of these, and they just asked for a quick show of hands. How many people in the audience had one of these? Every single person raised their hand because they understood what Victor understood. Victor didn't have a problem-free life, pain-free life. He lost kids. He had all kinds of problems in his life. But he learned that nothing can be wasted. You don't have to discard the problem points of your life. You can see opportunity there, and you can say, I know something can be made of this, something useful, something that can heal, something that can help. And he didn't just make these, he lived a life that represented what that was. What about you? What's your story? Where's your pain? Can you sit with it long enough? Maybe you need somebody else to companion with you to do that in a small group. Somebody else who can witness what you're going through and offer you some hope, encourage you to hand it over to a God who loves you and wants to take care of you and to make your story beautiful. I'm going to pray to that end. God, thank you for choosing to stay with us in the midst of our pain and suffering, not running off, not going, oh, sucks to be you, but staying with us so that we don't have to be alone and we know that there's future and there's a hope. There is an end to pain with you. We have a promised eternity where pain will be a thing of the past. But for right now, God, we need you. We need you to guide us, to walk with us, to be our strength. God, if it's hard for somebody here today, I know it's hard for me to admit the broken places and to hand them over to you and to trust that you can do something better than we can do. I ask that you humble us just now, even in these moments, to surrender those parts of our life as well into your healing hands. And we give you thanks in advance for how you're going to work in those situations. We praise you and we bless your name. We pray all this in your name. Amen.